Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions of the thing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it if you can support us. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome. And of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Joining me this week, we have Frank Bazzani back again. How you doing, Frank?
Doing good. How are you doing, Trevor?
Doing good. Looks like we're gonna have a good, healthy chunk of lag on this episode, so I'll do what I can to try and mitigate that. But
I'm sorry.
no problem. We will make it work. So this episode is going to be all about the Santa Claus. We are doing for the next few weeks. We're doing holiday movies. I think I mentioned in last week's episode the plan is effectively the Santa Claus, Home Alone, Nightmare Before Christmas, and Muppets Christmas Carol for the coming weeks. The order might shift a little bit, but we kicked it off here with Santa Claus. I kind of threw it out there. Frank was like, yeah, I either want to do Santa Claus or Home Alone, and kind of ultimately picked on Santa Claus. So Santa Claus it is. Why Santa Claus for you, Frank? Why did you pick Santa Claus?
This is definitely like one of those holiday classics for me, at least. Like I was a big fan of this one as a kid. Home Alone as well, and even Home Alone 2. But this was one of the ones that I liked a lot, and even I remember growing up being a huge fan of Home Improvement 2. And again watching it, I was like, it's like the same guy. Like obviously it's Tim Allen, but I mean like it's literally like the same dad basically,
Yeah.
except for he's a businessman instead of like a gearhead like tool expert.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a very nostalgic laden movie for me as well. This came out probably like when I was 9 or 10. Nine, I guess, as we will get to the date in a little bit. And yeah, it was just kind of like one of those staples of my childhood. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago, I think, on one of these shows. The idea that like we haven't had like any real good classic Christmas movies since like
hmm
Elf, but like
Yeah,
we had
and
this
the
like
Polar Express was like around the same time too. Like
yeah
it was like around the same time.
we had this like onslaught of them in like the 90s. This and
hmm
Home Alone kind of as a couple of those kind of key and I mean really all of the ones that I listed already. This Home Alone, Muppet Christmas Carol, and Nightmare Before Christmas, all like 90s movies. Even like watching this one again, it was like this is very much a 90s movie, and just like the pacing of it is feels like something that wouldn't get necessarily made today. And like the
hmm
credits and everything were it was very 90s.
hmm
And then it dawns on me that like I guess we are still getting Christmas movies. They're just always going to Netflix, and there are a million of them. So like
Yeah.
so none of them stand out as much. None of them end up kind of getting and like culminating around kind of this cultural impact. I guess one of the ones that came out last year. What was it? It was the Netflix one, Klaus.
hmm
That was that one. Like I think people who watched it really liked it. Ben Bellevue, in particularly for that nerdy site, really loved it, and I don't remember if he ended up ever writing out a review for it, but it was definitely in his like he wrote like I watched a whole bunch of the Christmas movies, so you don't have to. And yeah, it was just like every year I guess we get a few like attempts at kind of the next Christmas classic, and they just never really seem to stick beyond another year or so. Like Last Christmas is another one that I remember came out last year. I don't know if anybody's going to be going back to that one this year, but yeah, the Santa Claus and some of these other ones just kind of like hold up in a very interesting way,
hmm
and hold such an interesting place. Like, yeah, it's a weird kind of movie to try and make, especially in an era where like the B tier movies seem to have kind of fallen by the wayside in favor of every superhero movie or like indie films, and
mm
that's what we have. We don't really have that kind of like middle ground as much these days. I mean, it's a big investment. But yeah, let's dive in a little bit of the history here. Oh, just real quick, when is the last time you remember watching the Santa Claus? Like, had you watched it
Oh yeah.
recently?
I actually had just watched it like a few years ago.
Okay.
Um, I know this is kind of random too, because besides just having like the movie, Comedy Button had done like one of the one of the watch-alongs or commentary
Hmm.
for Santa Claus, where they sort of riff and like make fun of the movie. And being a fan of the movie and just kind of, I just sort of picked that up and dove in and watched it. And so that was kind of like me revisiting it as, in this kind of like really weird window, especially because they kind of came up with this bit about how like Tim Allen was crazy and drunk and not actually Santa Claus and was just kind of like a maniac. And it kind of made sense when you really look at it through that lens, which I thought was funny.
Nice.
And then it was hard to remove that from rewatching it again and just try to have like the normal nostalgic movie again.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I had just watched it like a couple years ago.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, I was like, as I was diving in, I was like, I think this is one of the ones I just threw on last year during the holidays with since Disney Plus came out. Like, I don't think I actually watched Home Alone because Home Alone was there, and then like Home Alone just disappeared after the holidays because it had like other pre-existing deals. But now it's back. But Santa Claus was when I was like, I think I sat down and rewatched that, and then sure enough, like when I pulled it up on Disney Plus, it was like, would you like to resume through the credits? And I was like, no, I'll just go ahead and restart the movie and rewatch it. And so yeah, I guess I rewatched it last year, but it was a blur of other Christmassy things. So yeah, it was still fresh in my heart. Logan also worth mentioning rewatched it in the hopes that he was going to be able to join us for the episode. He was not able to, but he did want to say, someone mentioned for me, The Santa Claus Remains a fantastic and surprisingly adult Christmas movie. Genuinely great. So those are his thoughts. My response was basically, it's basically Liar Liar, but with a Christmas wrapping job, which I think is like, they both,
Hmm.
again, kind of occupy that same, like, deadbeat jerk dad trying to make good for their kid in, one in a, oh, there's this weird magical curse that makes it so they can't lie, and then in this one, oh, there's a weird magical curse that makes him Santa Claus. And that's kind of what saves Jim Carrey and Tim Allen respectively, they're, while still largely being like jerk parents. But
Oh yeah.
yeah. So
Especially
yeah, go ahead.
this go around, I was like, man, he really is such a jerk.
Yeah.
Like when he's Scott Calvin, like he's such a jerk to just everybody.
Yeah.
And I was like, they could do a good job of setting it up, but I was just like, man, all right, like,
Yeah. He must have gotten so much coal in like recent years, and just like, did he just never wonder why he was getting all this coal? Yeah. So the history lesson, originally released November 11th, 1994. So like I said, I was 9 years old at the time. Were you even alive yet, Frank?
94. No, I wasn't.
Yeah, great, cool. Uh, Other notable releases of this era, in a weird thing, I don't remember which one this came up on, but I guess it was maybe like Frankenweenie or something. But the first two movies that I have here, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came out November 4th, and Interview with the Vampire came out with November 11th on the same day as this one. And both of those
Hmm.
strike me as like they would have been really good like a couple weeks earlier for like
Yeah.
holiday movie going. But then it does dawn on me that is holiday is or Halloween like the weekend that kids are going to the movies, or is that the weekend that people are like taking their kids trick or treating? So there's no point in really doing a Halloween movie Halloween weekend,
Mhm.
unless it's like really really spooky one. But yeah, still like just content wise, it seems like those would have been better suited, a couple weeks earlier. You also have coming out November 18th, Leon the Professional, kind
Mm.
of iconic Luc Besson film with Jean Reno and the thing that introduced Natalie Portman, I think, to the world. And then also in the holiday spirit, we had the '94 remake of Miracle on 34th Street came out November 18th. So this was basically dueling with Miracle on 34th Street for that like top Christmas spot. Has a runtime of an hour and 37 minutes And in the Disney timeline, because this is, surprisingly like originally a Disney movie. It wasn't, not Disney, but it was like Buena Vista Pictures or whatever. Not one of the things that was like acquired through Fox. But in the Disney live action films that come out around this time, the immediately prior to this one was Squanto: A Warrior's Tale, which came out October 28th, 1994. But I don't really remember that one, and it sounds
Hmm.
probably racist.
It kind of
So,
does, honestly.
like I'm sure it is looking at the actual like character of Squanto, but 94 handling of that topic, not Disney's strong suit. So going back a little bit further, you had Angels in the Outfield. There was
Oh,
July 15th, 1994, and then Jungle Book, the original live action Jungle Book, followed this up on Christmas, December 25th, 1994. And both of those movies I remember much better as a child than Squanto: A Warrior's Tale. So figured worth giving them the shout. The roll call, who's who in this film. For the director, you have John Pasquin, who is a frequent Tim Allen collaborator. Looking through his IMDb, he had done 39 episodes of Home Improvement. He followed this up with Jungle to Jungle, the another Tim Allen film, as well as Joe Somebody was somewhere in his IMDb, which is like a lesser known Tim Allen film that I remember coming out years and years later. And then most recently, he was working with Tim Allen on the TV show Last Man Standing, where he directed 73 episodes there. So they have had a long running career together as director and actor. The writers here were a team of Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick, who had worked together previously on The Dennis Miller Show. They would go on to direct or to write Space Jam after this.
mm,
So you got that classic.
hell yeah.
And then Steve Rudnick in particular went on in the last few years to write 5 episodes of the Muppet TV show, The Muppets, that I want to say was booted up in like 2017,
Hmm.
post Disney acquisition. That short-lived series, he wrote a few episodes of that. Starring, we have Tim Allen here, of course, as Scott Calvin slash Santa Claus, who this was his first major like film role, having just broken out in the years prior with Home Improvement. He, of course, would then go on to do Toy Story, Galaxy Quest, and most recently, again, the TV series Last Man Standing. Judge Reinhold as Neil here, best known prior to this for Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Beverly Hills Cop.
Yes.
Especially interesting thinking, like, and that was like the first thing I was thinking about when he pops up. I'm like, God, the guy probably best known prior to this for like the masturbation sequence in Fast
Hmm.
Times at Ridgemont High, suddenly being like a psychiatrist dad in a Santa like kids Christmas movie. That's an interesting jump for 10-year time span, I guess, is probably what that was. And then of course he is famously played the Honorable Judge Reinhold in Arrested Development, as well as I saw this Clerks had actually made the joke years earlier in the animated series of Clerks, so they beat Arrested Development to the punch on that one. You have Wendy Crewson here playing Laura, the mom, who prior to this had been, I believe, the mom in The Good Son, and then a couple years later would go on to be the mom in Air Force One. So she had kind of
Hmm.
a good little run there in the '90s as iconic movie moms that are never the focal point of the movie. Um,
Hmm.
and then Eric Lloyd playing Charlie the Kid, who prior to this had been young Kevin Arnold in an episode of The Wonder Years. And
Hmm.
then he would eventually go on to be in Dunstan Checks In. So he definitely kind of had that little moment of like childhood fame. Um, and then in the Brave Little Toaster TV movies, he played the role of Blanky. And this one,
It,
I love this one. He played young Bruce in Batman and Robin. Um, so I'm presume I haven't watched Batman and Robin in many years, but presumably he's Bruce watching his mom's pearls like get ripped off her neck. Um,
is
Yeah.
Is he the same kid that is in Santa Claus 2 and 3?
Yeah.
Like, is
Yeah.
it the same kid? Okay, I
He
thought it was. I just wasn't sure if they replaced him.
Yeah, no, he comes back significantly older because Santa Claus
Yeah.
2, I think, was like 99
8?
or 2000 or something like that. Like it was years later. And then Santa Claus 3 was like 2002. So I think like I think all three of them like came out within a decade of one another. I did not write that down. So I would need to look it up. But yeah, like he's definitely just that much older. And I don't think I've ever seen Santa Claus 3, but from what I remember Santa Claus
Mhm.
2, like it is very much he is he's grown up. He still
Mhm.
obviously knows that Santa Claus is real because it's his dad, but he's, going through like teenage things at that point in time or whatever, and he's kind of maybe distancing himself because the whole plot of Santa Claus 2, I believe, is like the Mrs. Claus, and
Yeah,
you
I
know,
love that.
the Santa Claus has to find a Mrs. Um,
I can only imagine the amazing afternoon they had in like the writers' room when someone was like, "I got it," and it was like, "It's the Mrs. Claus," and it
yeah,
must have just been like the best day they've ever had.
yeah, boom, nailed it. There's the other fine print that you didn't see on the card because the card even comes back
Yeah.
of and has like additional fine print of like you have to find a Mrs. blah blah
Mhm.
blah. Yeah.
I
Um,
uh
yeah. Go ahead.
I like them in like descending order of like one, two, three.
Hmm.
But I will say honestly, even the third one, not that bad. Because Martin Short plays
Yeah.
Jack Frost,
Yeah.
who shows up, and like that's kind of a good thing. Kevin Bacon's in it, and he does really good, but obviously that kind of ruins the movie at this point. Um, but like honestly, they built the whole world there, and the whole trilogy is kind of pretty good, honestly.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was interesting seeing like yep, all of them came back. One of the things that did jump out at me in looking through the IMDb, I don't know if I didn't double check like the credits to see if this is the case, but in this one, Judge Reinhold's character Neil is spelled Neal, and then in the other two movies it is Neil Miller. Like he has a full name in those movies, and so I'm like they didn't even keep his like spelling consistent, or maybe in between movies he changes the spelling of his name because he is a that kind of psychiatrist or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, also in here, as basically like rounding out the like these guys are also in the other movies. You have David Krumholtz, of course, here as Bernard, who
Love him.
prior to this had a little bit of a showcase in Adam's Family Values as Wednesday's kind of like romantic love interest at the Thanksgiving camp, and then around the years later, he certainly kind of like popped back up on my radar in the Serenity film, which is the movie based off of Firefly. And then around that same time, he broke out and did one of those like CBS procedurals, Numbers. But yeah, I always remember him as Bernard, and so anytime he pops up, like Bernard is ingrained in my head. But I'm like I'm glad that he's finding work elsewhere out there. And then Peter Boyle here plays Mr. Whittle, Scott Calvin's like boss. And then later, one of the little trivia things is like in the later two films, he comes in and just is like inexplicably, I think, kind of playing the character of Father Time, the more mythological character. So
Oh yeah, that's true. I never realized that.
yeah, so
He does that.
weird little like tie into to his character, and of course Peter Boyle, best known for Young Frankenstein, where he played the monster, doing Putting on the Ritz, and then of course he was the dad in Everybody Loves Raymond prior to this. A little bit of trivia. For 1 week in November 1994, Tim Allen had the number one movie at the box office, this movie, the number one rated television show, Home Improvement, and the number one New York Times best-selling book, Don't Stand Too Close to a Naked Man. I remember specifically my dad had that book. Like I remember it being like in the bathroom as like bathroom reading that he had just kind of sitting there. And
I'm sure
it,
that was the same for many dads in the
yeah,
90s.
yeah, because it was like Tim Allen naked with something like covering up his private parts or whatever. Like that was the cover of the book, and it was just like this is weird, but yeah, it just like it reminds me just how much like yep, my family, like, we watched Home Improvement all the time, and I couldn't tell you anything about that show apart from like, Tool Time with Tim Taylor and that kind of stuff. I couldn't tell you what the home life was. It was that I remember Wilson, of course, being behind the fence,
Mhm.
and I remember the three sons, obviously, like Jonathan Taylor Thomas, Zachary Ty Bryan, and the other one.
It
Uh,
was Mark, and I don't remember the other ones. I
yeah,
shouldn't have tried to even do that. I just
yeah,
remember Mark now.
yeah, and I could not tell you their names, like their character
Mhm.
names, any of that kind of stuff. But it was definitely like, 200 episodes of that show ran, and it was definitely a staple of that time. I definitely watched more episodes of that than I ever watched of Friends or Seinfeld in that era.
Mhm.
And
I
again, just
sadly,
don't
I think
remember
I've
any of
seen.
them.
I think I've seen every episode of all of those shows.
Probably, I mean, like in this era where you can binge watch them, it's very very
Mhm.
easy to do. Um, also worth noting, Tim Allen has a criminal record, and that's a fun thing. You can go look up his like coke dealer, like coke stuff from like the 70s or whatever, 70s or 80s. And Disney has a no hiring of ex-cons policy, but an exception was made in this case. Uh,
He has a great mugshot too. If anybody
oh
hasn't
yeah,
seen it, like
yeah,
it's him from like the '70s with like a huge mustache, and like
hmm
he looks great.
yeah. On older releases of this film, Tim Allen made a sarcastic remark in the movie, which included the line 1-800 Spank Me. During the film's release, a woman from near Cleveland, Ohio called a supposedly fictional number for her curious grandchildren turned out to be a phone sex line. However, it wasn't until 1997 when Disney received complaints from parents whose children called the number and racked up huge phone bills that the studio took action and cut the line for future releases. Disney also said they would purchase the phone number to disconnect the service. This part of the film is also cut from the DVD's release and on Disney Plus. And on TV broadcasts, the number is changed to 1-800-POUND. As of May 2020, the infamous 1-800 Spank Me scene is reinstated in the digital HD only, not 4K copies on Vudu, Amazon Prime, YouTube, and Google Play. But playing the movie through Movies Anywhere, Fandango Now, iTunes, or Disney Plus still presents the edited versions. That was two trivia bits like combined that I saw in there, and I was like, I vaguely remember like the line, but yeah, since I've only watched it on Disney Plus the last couple times, it's not on there, and I and I was like, I don't even know where it would have like fit in things,
Yeah, I
but
was like, I don't even remember that. Like, would you? Yeah, like I can't remember when he says that.
yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. Um, Other trivia here. During his tour of the workshop, Scott Calvin tries out a tool blade, then shakes his head as if to indicate the tools aren't for him. This, of course, is a reference to Tim Allen's then hit show Home Improvement, where his character's life, Tim the Toolman Taylor, revolved all around tools. The role of Scott Calvin slash Santa Claus was written with Bill Murray in mind, but after reading the script and being offered the lead role, Murray declined, saying he didn't think it suited his humor. We will dive into, near the end of trivia here, a plethora of other actors that were considered for the role prior to, or in addition to Tim Allen there. This is one that I like. I remember seeing like bits and pieces of, but I don't think I caught them all to this level. But elves are scattered throughout the movie in Scott and Charlie's world.
Hmm.
The little blonde
Hmm.
girl walking away from the window at the opening of the movie. That one very noticeable, very easy to catch. The little boy putting his jacket on and wearing a red scarf as Scott and Charlie are led to their seat in Denny's. The girl walking behind the bench when Scott has kids lined up at Charlie's soccer game. The girl in the purple coat who walks by Scott and Charlie in the park when Scott wants Charlie to stop talking about the Santa Claus, and the attentive little boy in the blue turtleneck behind Charlie's desk during show and tell are all elves. They show up as a group at the end of the film when Scott flies away from the Miller house, and they are the kids who run and skip off. I definitely don't remember catching like all of them. Even
Hmm.
like in this rewatch, I wasn't looking for it, so it wasn't until I saw this little trivia bit. But I was like, oh, that's a cool little like thing that is just kind of like peppered throughout the movie. That was a cute little like you have to think about like those shots all being like structured together, and it's admittedly it's probably just like, oh, those were all shots that were going to have other kids, so the director and hair and makeup just said, hey, let's just put elf ears on like one of these kids and we'll turn them into like a little thing, a little Easter egg through the movie. But still, it was a cool little like hidden thing in there for people.
Th
Yeah.
this was the first time I kind of ever noticed that, like unrelated to the doc, without having looked at it before I watched the movie. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I randomly noticed it like two or three times, especially at the end when they all came together outside his house. And I thought like, yeah, it was kind of, I was like, man, they must have just like, I thought it was almost like a mistake at first, where I was like, are they reusing some of the kids? And then I
Mm.
was like, oh, but no, it makes total sense. And like, I think that is kind of like a cool little thing, because it looked like it was also Judy at the end who's there at like their house, the one
Yeah,
who makes the hot chocolate.
yeah. I think I remember Judy, and I remember like all the kids like being elves and like walking away. I just didn't realize that those were kids that were sprinkled out throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Um,
And then this was the first time I ever noticed the kid in Denny's, like
yeah,
taking off his scarf and stuff. And I swear it's almost like a weird Matrix moment. Like I never remember that kid being there, and I feel like they edited him like into the movie, because I'm
uh,
like, I don't remember another kid like taking off his like jacket and scarf as they walk by. But
yeah, yep. Um, When Charlie and new Santa return to the North Pole for the new Christmas, Bernard introduces the techno-savvy elf Quentin, who proceeds to tell Santa about the gadgets the sleigh now has. This is, of course, a nod to the James Bond series character Q, who is the technology master for James Bond vehicles. This would have been especially a fun little nod for Logan in here, as he is such a diehard Bond fan. And then, as I mentioned, Peter Boyle, who is Scott's boss in the first film, appears in the second and third Santa Claus films as Father Time. Director cameo John Pasquin is Santa number 6 in the police lineup when they are looking for Scott Calvin. And then here we get to other actors considered for Scott Calvin, for Neil, as well as for the mom, Laura. So, other actors considered for Scott Calvin, according to IMDb: Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, Robin Williams, Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford, Rowan Atkinson, Jerry Seinfeld, John Ritter, Kurt Russell, Tom Selleck, John Travolta, Michael Keaton, Patrick Swayze, Mel Gibson, Jeff Bridges, Alan Rickman, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Mike Myers. A who's who of 90s people right there.
everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like some of those, it's like, okay, clearly like Arnold Schwarzenegger's like, okay, they like Jingle All the Way, and I don't remember in
Exactly.
the chronology of things when Jingle All the Way came out, but like some of these would drastically change what this movie was. Um,
Like Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson, especially in hindsight. Um, for the part of Neil, John Ritter was also considered there for Neil, as well as Jeff Daniels, Peter McNichol, Stanley Tucci, Bradley Whitford, Ryan Stiles, Steve Guttenberg, Rick Moranis, Christopher McDonald, Lance Kinsey, John Hurd, Dudley Moore, Alan Ruck, and Ted McGinley. And then for the role of Laura, other people considered were Patricia Clarkson, Pamela Reed, Sally Field, Goldie Hawn, Patricia Heaton, Kate Burton, Bonnie Hunt, Mary McDonnell, Jennifer Grey, Liza Minnelli, and Liza Minnelli. So, of those like roles, Frank, do you have like any weird alternate universe casting you would want to see as a mix of those characters?
I think it would be really interesting to see this movie with Tom Hanks as Scott Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think, especially as kind of being the '90s version of Tom Hanks, I don't think he maybe would play it as much of being like a jerk.
Yeah.
But I think he could really play this like eccentric, crazy guy probably pretty well. Like you can imagine like all the exacerbated things that like kind of happen through the movie and all the reactions he has. Like I feel like Tom Hanks would have carried that pretty well. Like you said though, it would have been a different movie,
Yeah.
and I don't even know if it would have been as well or like done as good. But I just think like it would have been interesting to see Tom Hanks in that role.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of like interesting, like looking through these names, it's like, okay, like Robin Williams, I can
Mm,
see a lot of Mrs. Doubtfire in this movie. In
mm,
particular, like the whole sequence where like Scott is trying to cook Christmas dinner, and you have the whole sequence in Mrs. Doubtfire where Robin Williams is trying to learn how to cook, basically, and you see him fail, and then like he finally gets it, right. Um, like Rowan Atkinson is one that's weird. It's like, okay, was like Mr.
mm.
Bean, is this just when Mr. Bean blew up and that's when, that
Yeah.
became very popular? Clearly had to have been the case. But yeah, like something like Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's just like what would what would the movie have been like with Arnold Schwarzenegger? But then you have to like think about Jingle All the Way and be like,
Mm,
his character in Jingle All the Way is like a Midwestern like business guy or something like that. who just is
Yeah,
like crazy thick Austrian accent, all that stuff, like and just like
yeah,
crazy bodybuilder, whatever like type. And clearly, it was not like that movie was not written for him either. But they found a way to make it work. So yeah, of these, I would like I would love to see. I would love to see Liza Minnelli as Laura, as the mom. I think that would just be, funny, especially since like my biggest touchstone of Liza Minnelli is admittedly like her weird Lucille 2 character from Arrested
yeah,
Development,
yeah. Same.
which is largely just an exaggerated Liza Minnelli. But I think that'd be, an interesting one.
Mhm.
I like when I saw this, I was like, oh, I would have really loved to have seen Alan Rickman do that because I think like he has
Mm-hmm.
such a dry, sarcastic humor that I think would have worked for like those Scott Calvin moments without coming across as like as egregious of an asshole. Like I think of
Mm-hmm.
him like as in Galaxy Quest, years later, that kind of like tone that he would have brought to the
Mm-hmm.
role. And then just because, you can never get enough Rick Moranis, I would love to have seen like Rick Moranis as Neil. Um,
Yeah.
Especially because like, I mean, like, I guess in a weird alternate, universe casting, the idea of like Bill Murray as the guy and then Rick Moranis as Neil would be an interesting juxtaposition given their
Mm-hmm.
Ghostbusters lineage. But yeah, it's just so and like Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey as
Mm-hmm.
as a pair there, or Alan
That would have
Ruck.
been a weird movie.
And Jennifer Grey as kind of like a reteaming them up after Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Um, um, in a different relationship, of course. Yeah,
Mhm.
lots of interesting
Yeah.
combinations that could have happened there.
If they
Um,
were going to do that, they should have just taken the whole trio from Ferris Bueller. This could have been
exactly.
like a weird far future sequel
Yeah.
where like she left like Ferris and is now with him, and then
Yeah.
Ferris has become Santa Claus.
Well, in Ferris Bueller, she's Ferris's sister.
Ah,
Yeah.
oh, right, right. Okay, got you.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, interesting seeing that. And like this is of anything we've ever done on that D Plus show, I think this was like the one where I saw the most of those like here's other people who are considered for this role, to the point that I just kind of lumped them all into like these one things. I basically just did a control F on IMDb's page and looked for the word considered and then just went through every entry and put them in these different places. So yeah, how do you think this holds up? What did you think of the Santa Claus revisiting this here in 2020?
I still think it's great. Like I still think it's fun and just like a good time. Like it's one of it is definitely just like a feel good holiday movie. Like, but I think even beyond that, there's still like a couple fun moments in there. And even after I've seen this movie like I don't even know dozens of times at this point, like it's still funny. Like there's still a couple things where I'm just kind of like laugh at and I think it's funny. And then even like I said too, like I in a weird way, like I love like Bernard and like he gets way more like screen time and character development in the other movies, but
Mm-hmm.
even going back, like I'm still every time he shows up, I'm always just like happy. And his dude, man, it got me with his thing with Neil, where he has like the food he's eating like a falafel or whatever. Neil like snatches it out of his hands, and then he just teleports away. And then Neil's like, "Where'd he go?" and like follows him like out the room or whatever. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like that. It's just funny. I don't know. It's a good time.
Yeah, I remember. I think one of the reasons I watched this last year was the YouTube channel Honest Trailers or Screen Junkies that does the Honest Trailer series. I think they did the Santa Claus, and they pointed out some things on there that I remember like jumping out. And one of them is like this movie clearly, as a lot of movies of this time, it seems do like has a very different relationship with psychiatry than like we do now looking back in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Tim Allen's character Scott Calvin's disdain for for psychiatrist Neil, and clearly the movie's disdain for it as well, disdain for him as a character,
Mm-hmm.
is definitely like that's a 90s thing where like clearly people were not as tuned in on like mental health stuff and all that stuff. And it just like it was a an easy go-to bad guy kind of character. And it's like you're picking on him for being educated and trying to treat delusional things, which in 99% of cases this would be a delusional kind of
Yeah.
situation. Just because there's
He
movie magic like in play here that makes you actually Santa Claus doesn't mean that like the any other thing that he's treating isn't, also, valuable.
Tim Allen's a maniac in this movie.
Oh yeah.
Like I this is one of those ones again where like watching it as a kid, I was always like, oh, but it's Santa Claus, come on. And as an adult, I'm like, he's insane, even though he is. I'm just like he just comes off as like he's a lunatic,
I
and
mean,
then he kidnaps the child.
yeah, and
Like,
like not even like lunatic, but like there are like just complete dick energy throughout the movie, even before like all that stuff. Like the movie opens at like the Christmas party for the job for his work, and he basically is like the sleazy marketing guy, who like he and the woman partner kind of thing, like she comes up, starts making her speech, and he immediately cuts her off, and it's just like that's a dick me too kind of movement right there moment. But then calling out the his coworker, and it's like our families clearly aren't here, and that's why so and so has his receptionist on his lap, ha 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 ha, and just everybody, it's got like 80s like business, Greed is Good, that movie, energy, Wall Street. It's got like that feel to it, and then he leaves that and is going to meet his son that he's supposed to have for Christmas, and he's calling
that he already knew about.
yeah, exactly. He already knew about it. He's calling and making this bullshit excuse about like traffic on a very empty freeway. And it's just like, yeah, he's just a dick, start to finish. And I love that like Charlie doesn't want to be there. Like I had
Yeah.
forgotten that growing up, because I so much of like what Charlie in my mind is like the excitement after all the Santa Claus stuff happens. So I forget that like he was not at all happy about, and he wants mom to pick him up at first thing the next morning. He's like, do I have to stay? This is gonna suck. This is gonna be a terrible time. And like everybody sees Scott for what he is, and that is largely a jerk. And so there's an element of like I appreciate that, but yeah, also like the movie still tries to make him endearing in that jerkness, and it's like, that rubs me the wrong way. Like I just want to recognize that he's just not a great guy and not somebody worth rooting for until the turn happens. It was very interesting, like watching it kind of through a like analytical lens of like, oh, there's a very clear 3-act structure to the film. Like Act 1 is the first Christmas. Act 2 is like coming to terms with the fact that he's now Santa Claus, and that whole relationship with himself, with his health, with his work, with his family. And then Act 3 is like the second Christmas, and yeah, him and Charlie being on the run, and like the whole like subplot of the police coming after him is one of those things like I don't think about as much when I think about this movie, but it's that's pretty much like the conflict at the end. The one of the things in IMDb trivia points out that this is the only movie in the Santa Claus series that doesn't feature like a dedicated villain to Santa Claus. I don't remember, like obviously we mentioned Jack Frost in Santa Claus 3. I don't remember who the villain is in Santa Claus 2.
Father
Specifically,
Time, I guess, because
is it
the
is it
clock is
Father
ticking
Time?
down, and well, he's not like specifically the villain, but the clock is ticking down because like he needs to get a girl by the end of the year.
Yeah, I feel
Oh,
like
I
it.
think there's someone who's going to take over if he doesn't. Like, I think someone's trying to get him to fail too, but I forget who
Yeah,
that is.
yeah. Um. Anyway, so yeah, it's without a lack of a dedicated villain. Of course, you have the kind of the police out on the hunt for Santa Claus. There being the villain for the conflict in the third act there, as well as the mom and Neil having to come to terms with the fact that Santa is real in this world. So yeah, very interesting kind of watching it through that lens. And I mean, it's a solid enough 3-act structure. It works. It's surprising, especially seeing that like, the writers didn't have much, credit before this, but also like especially with the idea that they wrote this with Bill Murray in mind. And then their other big feature film that comes after this is Space Jam, also clearly written with Bill Murray in mind. And he actually did that one. I'm like, these guys were just Bill Murray fans. Seems to be the thing.
They were writing Bill Murray fanfic at some point, and then
Yeah,
it just got turned into movies.
yeah. Um, Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Do you have any favorite moments or from the movie that you want to shout out, highlight?
Yeah, yeah, there's a couple because there's definitely, like I said, there's a couple things that I thought were still kind of funny and just kind of made me laugh. Well, honestly, even kind of going back to what you were just talking about with like the police, that whole bit is still pretty funny because I love that like they get the sketch artist to come in and they're like, this is what he looks like, and it's just Santa Claus.
Hmm.
And I love like I just love this whole bit, especially because like they're like this guy's crazy, he thinks he's Santa Claus, and they're all just like making fun of him and like being crazy. And then it's the same thing where in that same like kind of montage of them all getting ready, they just like jump a random Santa Claus walking down the street. And I was like, and with the one guy, the one police is like, it's gonna be so easy to find this guy. He's gonna be wearing red, and I'm like, it's Santa Claus and it's Christmas Eve. Like I
Yeah,
was like, you know how many Santa Clauses there are in the city? I was like, it's gonna be. I was like, that's the best cover to try to like do something at that point. Like there's people all over the city dressed like that.
yeah. You go out in front
So
of every Walmart, you're gonna have Santa Claus out there ringing bells. Um,
yeah, so
yeah, it's
um,
one of the little things I love that we touched on in the trivia there is Quentin the elf, and all of the like, hey Santa, here's how we're gonna keep you safe. Here's a flame retardant suit, all this stuff,
mhm.
and his whole worry is like, okay, but I got this job because a guy fell off a roof. How are you going to keep me from falling off a roof? Like that's the only thing he cares about. That's the only thing he's concerned about. I love that as a little beat for the character there. Anything else from you?
That's another one that I love too. And then the one of the ones that was kind of weird for me was that like, because like they never even do anything with that, because like he doesn't get a way to
Yeah,
not fall off the roof. They just like they're just like, no, we don't have something for that. We'll work on that later.
yeah.
Um, but
It's one I don't remember if they like revisit it in the sequels, but it definitely feels like it's a gag that they could have kept coming back to.
mm,
Um, one of the things I especially loved in this rewatch is like the weird Denny's product placement of like, we're gonna go to Denny's for Christmas. Everybody loves
that
Denny's.
scene makes me so
It's an
sad.
American institution, and then they get to Denny's, and it is the most miserable. And so it's like Denny's clearly agreed to be a part of this movie and agreed to have like their likeness kind of included. Um, so weird that they let them also be put in such a weird negative light in terms like I guess they get that that's part of the joke around holidays. Clearly nobody wants to be spending their Christmas at a Denny's necessarily, but
Mm,
that they're there and they're open is
yeah.
is something that they're I guess in support behind.
Th-
But yeah, it's just a weird like that's like usually when you agree to product placement in a movie, you agree to it on better terms for your company. You want to look in a better light.
No, yeah, well, I'm totally with you there because I never really thought about it, but that is really interesting because, like, yeah, like I guess that is maybe their ultimate motivation is because he even says that it's like, oh, they're always open, 24 hours, they're always here for you, and he even says like everybody loves Denny's, like,
Hmm.
but I love is that like to your point, like they totally agreed to this, and at one point the kid specifically says, I don't like Denny's,
Yeah.
and then in the other depiction of Denny's is like they don't have both of the things they're looking for because he asked for hot chocolate and he asked for chocolate milk and she tells him both times we're out. So I'm
Yeah,
like, it's like the
no,
worst depiction of Denny's.
yeah, eggnog and chocolate milk, I think,
Oh yeah,
or yeah,
yeah.
yeah, eggnog and hot chocolate maybe. Well, yeah, eggnog is the first thing. We're out. Okay, chocolate milk, we're out. Regular milk's fine. And it's just poor little kid just trying to get a beverage on at Denny's, let alone and then like and the whole gag that like Tim Allen looks over and like sees the other dads that clearly also screwed up on Christmas dinner, and like the one has like a cast on his hand or whatever. It's like,
Mm.
yep, burnt the turkey, all that stuff. The burning of the turkey gag also is another one that
Mhm.
just like it is such a quintessentially like '90s and sitcom joke that just goes
Mhm.
on, as long as it does. Um, there's
I
so much of this that like feels like in a weird alternate bizarre universe, like just an extended episode of Home Improvement, because it is like it's I almost expected to see Tim Allen as a credited writer for the film, because I got to imagine so much of that is just him ad-libbing, as I'm sure he did in a number of those kinds of movies and products.
No, I totally agree with you there too. Because like he carries like a lot of it just based off of like just kind of how his mannerisms and how he does things.
Hmm.
And one of the things I did want to mention about because I love about that scene is like the transition shot from the TV to like reality where
Yeah.
it's like this really it cuts in and it's this really beautifully cooked turkey and like all this nice food and it looks perfect and then suddenly like the resolution changes and it's like clearly a TV
Hmm.
and it pans out over the actual table and everything's just burnt and destroyed and then he's like fighting with the turkey in the oven and I was just like man I love like oh, I just love that shot even since I was like a kid. This is like such a great like I think they did there.
Yeah, in particular, that is I also recognize that as like that's a great transition shot, especially because like shooting TV, especially like CRT TV, you always run into that issue where like the lines will like get all funky and messed up, and so it clearly had to be like a transitional shot where like the beginning of that is just the thing that's playing on the TV, and it's like that just broadcast to in the film, and then it does cut to that point where it is okay. Now we're watching that thing on the TV, and we're going to continue, fading out. That was they do handle that very well as a weird like a tech shot of the maybe even potentially like CG on CG. The there are like the CG is I think where this film holds up the least.
Oh yeah.
In obviously the like the reindeer and the sleigh like going from like roof to roof. Like the physical animatronic reindeer, they look fine. Whatever, they're kind of what you expect. But then like the shot of the shots of them like flying through the air and landing on the roof, and then all the shots of Scott basically like molding into whatever fireplace. Like that's where I'm like, yep, okay, they just clearly like people in our circles could do better versions of those shots in After Effects like today. Like I couldn't.
Hmm.
I don't know if you could yet. But like I know editor friends of ours that could do better renditions of that using 2020 tech than we get in in this version of the film. But still, like those are so few and far between. And we lost Frank a little bit, so I'm gonna move over here just for the sake of the video version while I wait for him to hop back on the call, hopefully. But yeah, just some fun weirdness there in CG that doesn't completely take you out of the movie. It's just isn't as good as it could be. Um, I just kind of vamped a little bit there for you, Frank, while we got you back on the video.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Any other highlights from the movie you want to give a shout out to?
There was actually one more. This is a joke. I like a lot of the parts of the movie, but this is a joke that I don't think I've ever heard or just picked up on before, or maybe I just didn't get it or even realize it was a joke. But when he first picks up the bag and he's like goes up in the air, Charlie's like, "Dad, you're flying," and he's like, "No, it's fine. I lived through the '60s. Like I've
Hmm.
been through this before." And I was like, I totally just like that never even clicked for me before. I don't even remember him ever saying that.
Hmm.
But I also found that pretty funny. I was like, that's totally one for like the parents in
Yeah.
the audience.
Yeah.
Like,
Especially now that his past as well. It's definitely one that has a different light
yeah,
to it. Um, yeah, there were a few of those, but it like so much of it does feel like it is it is geared towards kids, but it does have like it's Tim Allen and he's cracking a lot of jokes. So like you have the little bits of like the kids naughty or nice, and then the woman who's very nice and she's like in your
yeah.
dreams, slay boy or whatever. It's like that was clearly like not aimed at the kids or whatever. One of the things that always that jumps out to me now is now that I know who Armand Sante is. I just always
Yeah.
remember like
Oh,
I always think of the Santa Claus when I think of Armand Asante, because he's the first name that he reads kind of on that list, and like I just
yeah.
remember thinking like, oh, that's a funny name with two A's, and it's not until like because like he's not a he's character actor and all that kind of stuff. I know him best from Chuck when he plays a foreign national president El Presidente on that of a made up country in a few episodes. And I remember like watching that and like seeing that it's Armand Asante and being like, Armand Asante, why do I know that name? And then like it clicking of like, oh, from the Santa Claus. Wait, that's who Armand Asante is? Because like Andre Agassi, I think is also on the like the first page of the thing, like in the on the in the shot. So like I appreciate that they include a couple of like recognizable Easter eggy kinds of names, but yeah, that's just one that like I definitely didn't catch who that was growing up, and it wasn't until years later that I was able to kind of put a face to that name. But yeah,
I
yeah, go ahead.
as a kid, I don't think I had ever caught that either, especially because I definitely didn't know who that was. And then now I do. And then that was watching it now, that was totally another one that stuck out to me. And like, I think I might have even said something out loud too, but I was like, man, what a reference. Like, I
Yeah,
haven't thought about Armando Sante. Like, wow, what a reference.
yeah.
And I was like, and that must have been like, this was peak like pop culture at that exact moment, I guess. Like,
Yeah, it's one of those I don't even know what he would have been known for in 1994 that like is being referenced. But yeah, it's still just like it's one of those weird things. Like Andre Agassi, I get that he was tennis pro, so it makes sense to have him there on the front page kind of thing. And maybe even like being said that might have been like the better line or whatever. But yeah, it was interesting. One last little one I want to give a shout out to is I really like I remember I don't remember why I remember like her so much or the impact of her, but like Elf Judy is really good. Like the kid who
yeah.
played Elf Judy in this, especially having to like just be like try and like be the adult in the scene against Tim Allen. She handled herself very well. Like I looked her up in the IMDb stuff for the roll call. She didn't really do too much after this, so didn't really feel like worthy bringing her in. Obviously, she doesn't come back in the other couple movies in the way that Bernard does. But yeah, it was just one of those like, oh, it like she is the other standout elf that I remember from this. I remember her, Quentin, Bernard, and I remember the head of the ELFs or ELFSs or whatever, the elves with attitude. And I just remember that from that line being in the commercial over and over and over again in the 90s. That's also a thing.
Again,
Like
they just put
the
the
elves
end of the
just
movie right in the commercials.
yeah, the elves that just like assault the cop, kind of that. Like that's a whole weird like bit. That sure, yep,
And
go
I,
for it.
I love the other guy who's in prison for we don't even know what, but he's like, "Yo, can I get some of that tinsel?" He's like
Yeah, yeah,
reaching his hand out the bar. He's like, "Can I get some of that tinsel?"
yeah.
Um, and before we move on to, I think Judy is a great call out because, like, yeah, she's like really good in that scene, and also that's another really funny kind of like adult joke when he's like, "You look really good for your age," and she's like, "I'm seeing somebody,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's just like makes a really weird face, and I was like, that's really funny. Like, so I mean, like, she does really good in that scene, and even with that delivery,
Hmm.
like, she was like, I'm surprised she didn't like go on to like be in more stuff.
Yeah. Um. Anyway, so overall, what would you give the Santa Claus from A plus to F? Where do you rank this one?
I would definitely give it an A at least, maybe an A plus even, because honestly, like it's a great movie. There's not even much I really have find fault with it, even 20 years later. The only even scene that I like even was gonna call out that it's not even something I don't love, but it's something I just thought was weird is that like Charlie becomes like the tech expert whenever he
Hmm.
goes to the North Pole the second time.
Yeah.
Because I don't even mind that they're like Charlie has a bunch of great ideas, but he's like in the sleigh, like working on wires with like a hard hat, and I was like, okay, so yeah, he suddenly just becomes like a genius.
Yeah. I mean, like you think of kids in the night. Like I was certainly the one that was having to learn like the computer compared
Mhm.
to like my parents and that kind of stuff. So I guess it kind of makes sense. And I definitely feel like he's probably more the ideas man. And Quentin and
Mhm.
the elves really make the stuff work. But he's learning. It's an internship kind of deal. He's up there making the cookie and cocoa dispenser and all that stuff. The CD player, haha, because CDs
Uh,
are such a timeless gag. Um,
that's
yeah,
another good bit though. Yeah, when he's like,
yeah,
"Oh, compact disc,"
yeah.
and
No,
he's like,
no,
"No, it's a hot cocoa dispenser."
yeah. Yeah, it spits out Judy's recipe and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Um, yeah, I probably go a little bit lower. I give it an A, probably A minus. Because I still think it is a good movie and for the most part holds up. But there were a lot of things just watching it that like it's like little beats here and there that I feel like in a modern movie would just get cut for like streamline.
Hmm.
Like 'cause there's a lot of like Tim Allen reaction shots that don't really add to the movie. It is him playing the sitcom character, not a movie actor. In a lot of those moments, one of them being even when the one you kind of just referenced with Judy, like there are a couple moments in there where there's just like a beat of silence where he's just doing a face that doesn't even really completely make sense with the context of the moment. It's like him reacting to something that wasn't really what Judy said. So like yeah, it's a couple of those kinds of things that I feel like would just get chopped for editing purposes and just like they don't drag the movie down a ton, but they were noticeable enough to me that I was like, yeah, I feel like you could have let Tim Allen be a little less Tim Allen, and I think maybe that would have helped things out there. But it's still overall, it's a fine, fun Christmas movie. Uh, like Scott Calvin is a dick, but you like
Mm.
getting to see that redemption story, that arc that he has when he finally starts to embrace being Santa Claus and all that stuff. Yeah. So extra credit, other suggestions if you like this. The Santa Claus 2, of course. Santa Claus 3, noticeably not on this list. I didn't remember to actually go in and check it and
Mm.
see if it's just not on Disney Plus or not.
It's on Disney Plus. I saw it on there.
Okay. So it's weird then that it doesn't make the like top 8 that they suggest. Maybe it was just like, hey, that's a different enough movie that we'll throw that in the suggestions on the Santa Claus 2. But yeah, Santa Claus 2, Noel, which is the one of the Disney Plus launch movies I think from last year with Anna Kendrick, which is cute enough. It's fun. I like it most because they come to Phoenix. That's where like most of the action takes place here in Phoenix. The Muppet Christmas Carol, one of my favorites. Home Alone. I'll Be Home for Christmas, which is the one we mentioned earlier with, or actually we might not have been recording yet, but JTT is on that one. That one came out a few years later, and it's weird because that is clearly like when JTT was like teen beat sex symbol based on the trailer
Hmm.
because it's just him like with a swagger kind of leaned up against a cactus, I think.
With
Um,
like he's disheveled like Santa
yeah,
Claus with
yeah.
like the Santa Claus suit. Like he's sexy Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one I definitely don't remember watching at all. So maybe that'll be a fun one to dive into next year during the holidays or something. Just be like, well, let's see what this other Home Improvement star did
Mhm.
for a Disney Christmas movie.
I
Um,
love that one.
the Christmas Star is one I didn't recognize and can't pick out of the top of my head. One Magic Christmas, the same, and 'Twas the Night. So those last three recommended for Disney Plus. I don't remember what any of those ones are about. You watching anything else on Disney Plus these days?
Not too much. This was pretty much the only thing I signed in for, but I might actually go back because besides the holiday thing that we're probably going to do here, there's even a couple other holiday ones in there I thought were kind of like even interesting because there's like besides the other Santa Claus movies, there was the one with JTT, and that was going to be like one of my recommendations before it popped up in like the recommended thing because I was like that's another great one,
Hmm.
and even what I was surprised I didn't know it was on Disney Plus, Richie Rich,
Oh yeah,
or at least
yep.
the second one, because the second one is specifically a Christmas movie, is on Disney Plus, and I was like, so that's another great call out that I might even watch this year because that's another like one of those favorite like '90s Christmas movies
Yeah.
that I like. So that's probably going to be my whole Disney Plus catalog.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think back on and like I see a ton of people doing this these days. Like we're gonna watch one Christmas movie every day, during the holidays or whatever, and it's so easy to do and so bingeable on, with all the streaming services. Like I definitely had my for a few years there, I had my traditions of I pulled out my Die Hard DVD, I pulled out a Christmas Story DVD, there was and It's a Wonderful Life. Those would be kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the three staples that I would sit down and watch, and like I like Die Hard. I will absolutely still sit down and watch anytime I can. But the other two, I'm just like, I've seen those enough. Let me look at some of these Disney movies that I haven't delved into as much or as recently. And like A Christmas Story in particular, it's like I watched that so much growing up that I definitely don't need to ever really watch that one again.
Mhm. Mhm. I can tell
To
you the whole movie off the top of my head.
Yeah, exactly, and that's another one. Honest Trailers just this week, as we're recording, did their honest trailer for A Christmas Story, and it was like, is this really a good movie, or is it just like ingrained in us because we have the whole thing memorized,
Mhm.
and it is like. It's one of those things I realized maybe a few years ago, but like just the idea that that one is basically just a series of sketches, like all sewn
Mhm.
together. It's with like the very loosely based like Red Ryder BB gun like plot, but everything else it's
Mhm.
just like little vignettes of Americana during during 1940 or whatever. But yeah, it's another one that just was such a staple growing up, as because it was just on all day on Christmas on TNT. So it was that was the movie that like I would watch while I waited for my parents to wake up so we could unwrap presents
Mhm.
and stuff. And I would probably watch it like one and a half or two times. It just like I would wake up. It would be like 5 in the morning, so I knew my parents were not going to be awake or want to wake up and open presents anytime soon. So I would just like put that on and just kind of enjoy it for what it was. I've still been, as for me, I've been watching The Mandalorian, kind of keeping up with that as it has been airing. So really enjoying that and really enjoying just how in the expanded universe that show is really veering into. So,
Mhm.
and including the fact that the Mandalorian now, or the Baby Yoda now has a name. So that's out there for the world. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. A little bit of a longer one, but they usually are when we have kind of somebody else to bounce off of. So thank you, Frank, for joining me on this one. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to give some love to, give a shout out to, Frank?
Yeah, just a quick shout out to our Patreon episode for this month. It was the sort of forgotten and underrated gems from this last generation. It's on Patreon right now at the $1 tier, but then it'll eventually just go on YouTube at the end of the month for everybody if you want to wait and check it out then. But I thought it was a fun episode. I like diving back and just talking about some forgotten gems that we all sort of had.
Yeah, I will absolutely agree with that and echo that shout out. You can follow me at Trevor J Starkey, and as Frank mentioned there, yeah, for $1 and above, any of our patrons can go out and get access to that Forgotten Gems episode. Right now, it is me, Frank, Logan, and Cam sitting down for about 2 hours. We each kind of brought a handful of games to the table to talk about, yeah, just like the games that were in the number 6 to number 10 tier of our top games of the year lists over the last generation, from the kind of PS4, Xbox One, like 2013 and on kind of generation of games. And yeah, it was really fun. One of the things I loved is we all brought 5 or 6 games to the table. We ended up kind of highlighting 3 each, but we had extras in case we doubled up. And we didn't really ever end up doubling up. Like we had a bunch of games that a bunch of us had played, but as far as like the games we each wanted to give some love to and shout out, we kind of brought in just a whole plethora of unique ones. So yeah, we dive deeply into about 12, and then we each had some honorable mentions. So we kind of give those a little bit of love there at the end of the episode too. So available for $1 or above. Any patrons over there for now, but it will go live, as Frank said, December 31st, the end of the month, for everybody. You follow all the latest from That Nerdy Site over at thatnerdysite.com. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, please go over and support us over there on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining me, Frank. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.